This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. Real quick before I jump in, there are two things. Get on the wait list for Create Your Program. I'm going to be opening registration for early access to Create Your Program from November 13th through November 20th only. So if you get in during that window, you pay exactly the same amount as usual, and you get 2 months of access to the entire curriculum before the group calls start in January. This gives you time to start going through the work at your pace, and that sets you up for success. Create Your Program is the best process for therapists who want to create a signature program of their own so that they can make money and work in new ways and learn business skills that they're going to use for the rest of their careers. So if private practice is not the only way you want to make money, Create Your Program is for you. So head over to rebeltherapist.me/create to get on the wait list right now so you're notified as soon as registration opens up. The second thing, come hang out with me. You're invited to an open house and Q&A about creating your first program. And that's on Tuesday, November 14th at 1 p.m. Pacific. You're going to hear exactly how Create Your Program works, who it's a good fit for, who it is not a good fit for, and I'm going to answer your questions live. So sign up for that, even if you can't make it live, and you'll get a recording. Go over to rebeltherapist.me/open to sign up for the open house. All right, let's get into it. Right now, I am feeling so grateful to be running a very small, very simple business. And I have no plans to grow this business to 7 figures. So there are a few reasons I actually hesitated to say that out loud to you and to talk about it. I thought, maybe you're not going to think I'm a badass if I say I'm not trying to get to 7 figures. And maybe you won't want to hire me if you haven't already. Maybe you're going to think I've got some limiting beliefs, some upper ceiling problems. And I also thought, if you're my friend who runs a bigger and more complicated business, maybe when you hear what I have to say today, you're going to think I'm judging you. I promise you I'm not. But since I have the desire to be radically honest, and I think this serves you, I'm going to share my thoughts about this and why I'm so grateful to be running a small and simple business. And I trust you to identify the parts of this that fit for you and the parts that don't. Capitalism tends to pull us towards one vision of what it means to be running a successful business. And that is being a business owner who makes more and does more. Capitalism tends to pull us away from noticing when we have enough, or even considering what enough might be and how we might know when we get there. Feeling enoughness or feeling satisfied is not helpful to capitalism. And in thinking about enoughness and feeling actually satisfied, I want to reference Adrienne Maree Brown and Sonia Renee Taylor, who both discuss enoughness and feeling satisfied in their work in such interesting and helpful ways. Just a quick definition. When I use the word scale today, like scaling your business, what I mean is simply working to serve way more people by hiring a bigger team and perhaps having more complicated tech. And when I describe a simple business, what I'm talking about is having a very little team or maybe even no team and a focus on serving a small number of people using simple tech. And as usual, the businesses I'm talking about are service-oriented businesses. That's really my lane. That's what I know best. So what does the vision look like of a more complicated, scaled, service-oriented business? It's a person who is running a company that brings in a revenue of 7 figures or more, sometimes much more. They've hired a big team. They have expanded their business to serve more people year over year, bring in more revenue year over year. When we picture that business owner, we see them with a ton of influence, tons of employees, tons of followers. And the focus here is on numbers like total revenue, number of team members, number of followers, and number of people served. And you might even hear, like when they're introduced, you might even hear some of those numbers in their bios. So this might look like a coach who runs a course or a membership with hundreds or thousands of members at a time. And perhaps they have many, many offers in their company. So that is often the vision of a successful business owner. But when I look around at my colleagues and my friends who are entrepreneurs who are having a good time and feeling fairly stable financially, I tend to see people with tiny teams, like maybe 1 or 2 employees. And I see smaller revenue, like maybe under 500K, but with businesses that are so simple that the owner actually gets to keep way more than half of that money, way more than half of that revenue after they set aside money for taxes and, paying for their overhead, because they don't have much overhead. These are simple businesses. And a simple business can be really strong. When you're running a business that simple, you're really nimble. You get to pivot tomorrow if you want to. You get to make quick decisions, and your systems tend to be pretty simple. So that is the kind of business I'm running. And that is the kind of business that right now I'm really grateful to be running. And yes, of course, there are folks who are well suited to building a business model that is much more scaled, much more complicated. But it's probably less people than are initially drawn to that more complicated business model. Sometimes people come to work with me, they sign up for Create Your Program, hoping to create a huge empire, like a big membership or a big online course with serving like hundreds or thousands of people. And I am delighted to help them, because the first phase in creating that kind of an empire should be to create a really solid, small, simple business. And that is what I help with. So even if they want to scale, they should start with me. And when you start with a strong and simple business, you're going to base that business on creating value. And that is where every business needs to start. So here's what sometimes happens for people who decide that they want to scale their businesses. They get really excited about growing a business that can run eventually mostly without them. And as they're moving towards that, or even living that dream of having a large team, having big revenue, and having more and more people served, a lot of times they start to notice that they are working at least as hard and working at least as many hours, and that they are not making more money. And they're noticing that the dream of pulling back their hours and pulling back their work is elusive. It's kind of like this dream that keeps on being out of reach, just a little bit out of reach. And they keep waiting for the time that they're going to get to pull back. So what they had wanted was a picture where they have a team to support them so they don't have to do all of the parts of the business that maybe they don't like. And instead, they end up feeling like, I have a team, so I have to bring in big revenue or I won't be able to pay them. I have to have a bigger audience and make more sales to just support this business. I've watched a few colleagues and folks I follow go through kind of a reverse empire narrative where they start scaling and then they notice what's happening and they actually turn back and simplify again. And usually people keep this private because it kind of doesn't go with the narrative of growth and expansion that we tend to idealize. But some people have talked publicly about this. I'm going to talk about them, and then I'm going to talk about me a little bit. So Tarzan K is one of these people. She's a copywriting coach. She helps people learn to write great, engaging emails for nurturing and selling to their audiences. She's got a weekly email for her subscribers, and those emails are pretty juicy. And there's an option where you can sign up to hear her read her emails in a private podcast feed. Each email is about 3 minutes long. And I recently listened to 3 years of her emails over just a couple weeks. And I did this while I was doing things like vacuuming my house, cleaning my bathroom, and driving, because that's how I do. So as I'm listening to 3 years of what she's sharing, it's only happening to me over a couple weeks. So at the beginning, she was talking about being so proud to be blasting past 7 figures in revenue and building a robust team and not actually knowing how to run her business's tech anymore. She was talking about how she couldn't really load her own emails into her email provider service anymore. And she talked about relying on her team members to handle huge launches, but also working extremely long hours herself during those launches. She also talked about having complicated affiliate relationships, some of them with big names like Amy Porterfield. And then, remember, in my experience, this happened over a couple days, but in her life, it was over many months. She let her whole team go. She realized she had been bringing home a similar salary even when her company's revenue was way up. She was working the same amount, or sometimes way more, and feeling stressed about being responsible for so many employees' paychecks. She also mentioned that she was no longer open to being an affiliate with that very famous business strategist I just mentioned, because she believed that person was overpromising. When that happened, I just yelled. I was like, whoa, she really just said that. Because integrity makes me swoon. Then she walked through the very painful process and experience of letting go her entire staff. And she talked about that. And then paring way down on the complexity of everything in her business, including her tech and systems. So she was able to load her own emails into her email provider once again. And finally, she talked about ending up working about the same amount and making about the same amount, even though her company's revenue went back down, but not being responsible anymore for a bunch of people's livelihoods. Oh, and she says her program is more valuable than ever because she is in it more. So her business looks really simple now. She's also stepped more and more into living by her values of anti-oppression and calling out the problems in the coaching industry. So again, swoon. And I feel so grateful for her sharing this journey. As my friend Podge says, I feel pretty great about learning from other people's mistakes at this point in my life. So her emails are a great read, and getting into that private podcast feed is a great listen. I will have a link to that in the show notes, and her name, in case you missed it, is Tarzan K. Now, another person who has shared her journey publicly, reversing the scaling process, is Tara McMullin. She was my business coach for years. In episode 187 of Rebel Therapist Podcast, Tara talks about making a huge pivot. She realized she had built a successful business that she did not want to run anymore, and she did not have the capacity to run anymore. Her business model was based on a community membership of entrepreneurs, one that I was a part of, and she decided to leave it behind. First, she tried everything she could to make it work for her, making adjustments here and there, setting different boundaries, but nothing she could do to tweak that business model made it work for her. It just didn't work for her nervous system. And finally, she gave herself permission to walk away. So you can listen to that conversation in episode 187. That'll be in the show notes. Now I'll talk about me for a moment. I make choices all the time not to scale. In Create Your Program, I'm the coach and I'm on every call, with the exception of private calls for BIPOC identified participants. Rather than hiring assistant coaches to take on cohorts and having me maybe just focus on the marketing, like some coaches with bigger, more complicated businesses do, I'm on every call. I hire guest teachers with specific skills I don't have. So I hire a lawyer to come in and do a legal Q&A call. I hire a tech expert to come in and answer tech questions. And like I just mentioned, I hire a business mentor who provides additional private calls for BIPOC participants. And then in my follow-up program to Create Your Program, in Rebel Therapist Marketing Intensive, I hire a copy and messaging coach who works with our participants on their copy. So in these ways, I'm not scaling, but I'm adding value. Another way I keep things really simple is by only running 2 programs. So Create Your Program is for creating your program beyond private practice and doing a simple launch. And then Rebel Therapist Marketing Intensive is for grads of CYP who want to grow their audiences and speed up the success of those programs. When I'm a customer or a participant in a service-oriented business, I prefer to be working with a small and simple business. Right now, I'm a participant in a program run by Deb Benfield, and you're going to hear about that in my interview with her in the next episode. So she's running a high-touch program, and she's serving a small group of us, and we are happy to pay a premium for what she's offering and having so much direct access to her and her wisdom. So something for you to consider. In building your business, what would it look like if you kept it simple? Or at least if you started by creating a strong and simple business? Rather than going straight for the default vision of bigger and more year over year, what would simplicity look like? The business that you really want to run and that you find satisfying and that pays your bills comfortably might be way closer than you think. Now here's a little sidebar. I know you might be thinking, but what about having a larger program so you can serve more people and have it be more affordable? So what I'm going to say is the quickest way to serve more people in a way that more people can afford is to create content that you give away for free. And you can do that at any size of business starting today. So we have offered several free events this year and every year. And we've got this podcast, and that's free. And we have other free content. So if the end goal is having something affordable for more people, maybe consider just creating some high quality free stuff and simultaneously use that content to bring new people into your audience. Sometimes it can be very simple. So remember, get on the waitlist right now for Create Your Program at rebeltherapist.me/create. So you're going to get notified as soon as we open up registration and you get all the early registration goodies. And come be with me at the open house on Tuesday, November 14th at 1 p.m. Pacific. Sign up for that by going to rebeltherapist.me/open. I want to thank Ames Palms for editing this podcast. If you found this episode supportive, please do a couple of things. Share it with your favorite therapist or healer. That is absolutely the most important way we reach more people. And if you haven't already, please hit follow and give us 5 stars. That is so helpful to this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.